So here's what we're doing today. All right, I'm going to start you in rhetorical analysis. I need to kind of move a little bit because I need to get us to a certain point by the end of today. Today is going to hurt your brains a little bit, all right? But we're going to jump in with rhetorical analysis. This is the hardest part. This is probably one of the harder things we do all year, so we do the most of it, all right? I'm going to take you through some parts that are important. So this isn't yellow pages that we'll hand out next week, but I would say this is probably a lesson that I would keep, because when you start analyzing text, you might want to look back at the questions that I asked here so that maybe you could ask similar questions to pieces of text that we're going to look at, okay? So first couple of things that we're going to look at, we're going to look at the passage first, all right? So when we look at the passage, we see we're doing rhetorical analysis. Question number 2 is rhetorical analysis, okay? It has been for many years, and we don't foresee that changing, but, you know, just know that the second question is rhetorical analysis. You have your prompt. I'm going to tell you that I feel like in the past, you guys have skimmed over the prompt more than not, okay? For us, we have to get a lot of context out of our prompts for us to understand what we're going to write about. I feel like in the past, when you have written, it's usually been a prompt over something that you have discussed in class, read in class, researched, whatever. Can we agree on that? So what you're going to struggle with in here is you're going to be given a piece of paper and a passage over something that you have no context about. So we are going to try to teach you I'm going to try to teach you how to find context in everything, because it helps with finding your audience, finding your purpose, and finding out like why somebody would say this, all right? So the very first thing we're going to look at, we're going to say, okay, in the following passage from The Great Influenza, an account of the 1918 flu epidemic, author John M. Barry writes about scientists and their research. Read the passage carefully. Then, in a well-written essay, analyze how Barry uses rhetorical strategies to characterize scientific research. So there's our prompt. Couple of things, we'll dig into it a little bit more later. First of all, this is in italics, so what do we know about this? Title of a book. Very good. And the book is about what? Well, that's the title of it. The 1918 flu epidemic. Okay, so that's the topic. Is the 1918 flu epidemic. The author, obviously, is John M. Barry, writes about scientists and their research. So notice that scientists and their research is really, truly what it is about. Though it is about the flu epidemic, it is more on the side of scientists and their research. So this, for me, would kind of be like the point of view. Right? So we know that it's not going to be a personal narrative. You're not going to have stories, right? You're going to have more the focus on scientific research. So you're taking the mind of a scientist. All right? Read the passage carefully. That's always in there. Then in a well-written essay. That's always in there. Notice, you'll hear me call this the marker verb. Analyze how Barry uses rhetorical strategies to characterize scientific research. So this is your marker verb. And this is similar to, I was talking to DeToy, and I was talking to some of the science teachers before school started. You'll see terms like this, what I call marker verbs, you'll see them if you're taking other AP classes. And I can't remember if it's the LAQ, or I think you have a short answer response on APUSH as well. They have marker verbs that tell you what you need to do. AP Bio, I was talking to Mrs. Jones last week. They have, and that doesn't affect y'all until you'll take it senior year, but they have on their test has changed a little bit, certain definitions that you have to understand. So we have to pay very close attention to our marker verb because it tells us how we're going to approach our analysis. Okay? All right. Then you have rhetorical strategies to characterize scientific research. Here's what I think. Before you get in, when you would go in, let's say I just gave you this passage and I've looked at your annotations and they're not great, and I'm going to tell you how to change those, okay? If I gave you this right now, what would you annotate for? What would you look for? Rhetorical strategies. You would look for things, right? Here's what happens, and I think this happens to you guys a lot. You start what I call, like, where's Waldo? Like, where's the simile? Where's the metaphor? Where's the diction? Oh, wait, words? We're looking for words as opposed to pantomime and pictures, right? Y'all just start looking for things. You miss the meaning of the context. So I need to give you a better thing to look for rather than devices. If you come across devices, awesome. So what is our true purpose for reading? What does the prompt say? To do what? Characteristics of scientific research. So what I'm going to put at the top is this. Characteristics. I do that for me because as I'm reading, I need to not get lost in devices. You are no longer annotating for devices. Can I get an amen? Amen. Now, did I just say that you won't come across them? No, but you need to focus on characteristics. Within those characteristics, will you find devices? Yes, absolutely. Okay? But I need you to focus to be more purposeful. Now, those of you that go, I don't need to annotate, I'm going to call you a name today. I'm going to call you a fool. You are a fool if you believe that you can read something, not annotate, and come out 5 minutes later and write something intelligent. Okay? So what I want to teach you this year is how to annotate purposefully that will help in turn go into your writing. Okay? A couple of things that I'm going to tell you on how to do that. Very first thing when we close read is I need you to number body paragraphs. Okay? So that's what we're going to do first. Certainty creates strength is 1. To be is 2. A scientist is 3. All real is 4. Ultimately is 5. Not all is 6. All right. So we number body paragraphs before we start for a few reasons. When we did our timed writing, how many body paragraphs did I tell you to write? 2. Okay? So as we read, we need to read for a shift. Okay? You guys know when shifts can happen, right? Shifts in tone, subject, author, speaker, purpose, whatever. We're going to look before we even get in where a shift might happen. Sometimes it happens in the middle of like the number of paragraphs. So here, if all else fails, I need you to divide this in half. You have 6 body paragraphs. Where would you divide it? Right before 4, between 3 and 4, right? Paragraphs 1 through 3 in paragraph 1, paragraphs 4 through 6 in paragraph 2. All else fails, you can't find any shift, you do that. Okay? A friend of mine who has written for the AP Lang exam and now currently writes for the SAT says that if you'll notice, we have 2 columns. We'll have some older passages that aren't 2 columns that are just, paragraphed down. But he said when they switched to 2 columns, what they did was where the break is at the bottom of column 1 to the top of column 2, usually somewhere in there is a shift. Does that make sense? And it usually does not happen in the middle of a body paragraph. But somewhere around that break, right before or right after, there is usually a shift. The other thing that you can look at for a shift is lengths of paragraphs. What do you notice about lengths of paragraphs here? Where? Okay, so the 4th one gets longer. So, this one, if we had to break it, where would we break it? Probably right after 3. So before I read, I am going to guess where the shift is. Now, look, that matches all of the above, right? That matches dividing it in half. That matches looking at the organization, the length. It also matches the break. Does that make sense? Okay. So, I'm going to read. I need you to annotate. What?
What if there were like 7?
So that's good. So there's not always even. So usually it's either like 4 and 3 or 3 and 4. So sometimes it's not even. And also sometimes there's more than one shift. We'll read something later this year that I've had, like we've had arguments in class, not arguments, discussions in class where they say 2 shifts and not just 1. There's where I shift, where I find the break isn't necessarily where you're going to find the break. But if you find it somewhere different than me, you just have to validate why you find it there. Okay, good question. All right, I'm reading, you annotate. What are you annotating for? Characteristics. Certainty creates strength. Certainty gives one something upon which to lean. Uncertainty creates weakness. Uncertainty makes one tentative if not fearful, and tentative steps, even when in the right direction, may not overcome significant obstacles. To be a scientist requires not only intelligence and curiosity, but passion, patience, creativity, self-sufficiency, and courage. It is not the courage to venture into the unknown. It is the courage to accept, indeed embrace, uncertainty. For as Claude Bernard, the great French physiologist of the 19th century, said, science teaches us to doubt. A scientist must accept the fact that all his or her work, even beliefs, may break apart upon the sharp edge of a single laboratory finding. And just as Einstein refused to accept his own theory until his predictions were tested, one must seek out such findings. Ultimately, a scientist has nothing to believe in but the process of inquiry. To move forcefully and aggressively, even while uncertain, requires a confidence and strength deeper than physical courage. All real scientists exist on the frontier. Even the least ambitious among them deal with the unknown, if only one step beyond the known. The best among them move deep into the wilderness region where they know almost nothing, where the very tools and techniques needed to clear the wilderness, to bring order to it, do not exist. There, they probe in a disciplined way. There, a single step can take them through the looking glass into a world that seems entirely different. And if they are at least partly correct, their probing acts like a crystal to precipitate an order out of chaos, to create form, structure, and direction. A single step can also take one off a cliff. In the wilderness, the scientist must create everything. It is grunt work, tedious work that begins with figuring out what tools one needs and then making them. A shovel can dig up dirt but cannot penetrate rock. Would a pick be best, or would dynamite be better? Or would dynamite be too indiscriminately destructive? If the rock is impenetrable, if dynamite would destroy what one is looking for, is there another way of getting information about what the rock holds? There is a stream passing over the rock. Would analyzing the water after it passes over the rock reveal anything useful? How would one analyze it? Ultimately, if the researcher succeeds, a flood of colleagues will pave roads over the path laid, and those roads will be orderly and straight, taking an investigator in minutes to a place the pioneer spent months or years looking for. And the perfect tool will be available for purchase, just as laboratory mice can now be ordered from supply houses. Not all scientific investigators can deal comfortably with uncertainty, and those who can may not be creative enough to understand and design the experiments that will illuminate a subject, to know both where and how to look. Others may lack the confidence to persist. Experiments do not simply work. Regardless of design and preparation, experiments, especially at the beginning when one proceeds by intelligent guesswork, rarely yield the results desired. An investigator must make them work. The less known, the more one has to manipulate and even force experiments to yield an answer. All right, how many of you are completely confused about what was just written? Okay, raise your hands, because a lot of us are. The very first time I read this, I can tell you, I read it, had my class write about it, and then I reread it, and I go, I don't even get it. Let's throw this one out and not do this one. So we threw it away. Okay, now this is one of my favorites. But what I have to do is I have to teach you how to see the passage and how to figure it out. One, you have to hear me read. Did you hear me blow through dashes, blow through commas, or blow through periods? No. The way I read it is the way that you need to read it in your head, even under pressure. Okay? I think it's one of the reasons why y'all struggled with Tale of Two Cities, because you just blew past all the commas and there's so much complexity in those sentences, right? Same thing here. Okay? All right. So, what did you annotate? Anybody find a simile or a metaphor? Rhetorical questions, dashes, right? Periods, commas, yes. Imagery. Okay. You have no idea what to say about any of those, right? What I'm going to show you is this. The next page is we're going to work through the NMSI layout. I'm going to tell you the reason why we do NMSI lessons, and this is the group that I work for that I told you outside of school, right? This is like the group that I do like trainings for. So the reason why I like these assignments is these assignments break down what your analysis will be. Many times last year did you feel that you took a piece of evidence or a couple of pieces of evidence and ended up saying the same thing over and over again? Okay, you say yes because many of y'all did. Okay, what this will do is these questions will help to guide you in what questions to ask in order to get to the level of analysis that you need to. I'm going to tell you that this is going to be frustrating because you haven't had to think this way and see big picture. I'm going to tell you that a lot of things that you're going to say to me in these first couple of months, I'm going to say, that sounds good, but it means nothing. It's fluffy, okay? So we have to struggle through, much like the scientists, okay, failure in order to get to the good, okay? All right, so what you'll notice the way this is laid out, the boxes are the parts of the passage. So notice in the top box is our prompt, right? You could reread the prompt again. We've already seen it, right? Let's go to the first question. What you're going to see is you're going to see us. These are questions that you would ask yourself that eventually, once we get past this, you would be writing around the prompt here. But now we're just going to answer on this page, okay? First question we're going to ask, and I'm going to divide these into two. What assumptions can be made about scientific research? Now, remember, we need to give ourselves context. Like I said, last year, a lot of the stuff that you wrote about was stuff that you had already talked about. So you already had context. You understood the author. You understood the time period it was written in. You understood the book, right? So you had context. 60% of the stuff you have in this class, you will have no context for. If you do have context, it will be historical context. All right? All right. So these questions help to create context for us. All right, so let's look at the first one. What assumptions can be made about scientific research? What do y'all know about scientific research?
Failure before success.
Okay, there is a lot of failure before success. Sounds like our class. Good, Brittany. What else? Yeah, it takes a lot of time. Good, Edgar. What else?
Usually takes more than one person.
Usually what? I'm sorry.
It takes more than one person to complete it.
Okay. Nick, what were you going to say?
It followed the process.
Anything else? Okay, good. Give us some context. Look at the second question. What inference can be made about scientific research in regards to epidemics? Okay, so what is an epidemic, first of all?
Something spreads
Out of control, but where? No. That is a pandemic. When you're talking something major that is more than just a centralized small location. An epidemic is like Zika right now in Miami. That's an epidemic. Okay? A pandemic is going to be huge. So but can an epidemic become a pandemic? Yes, Ebola. Spread quickly, right? Okay. So now let's talk. What can be made? Now we know about scientific research. How does that change our understanding of scientific research in an epidemic? How is it different?
Focused on one thing, but it can be
Okay, so it's focused on one specific problem or disease, right? Okay, what else?
we don't have as much time.
Okay, so you have less time to find a cure. Okay, what else?
Becomes pain.
Why?
And people are afraid of it.
Yeah. Let's go back to the idea of scientific research. What do you know about not just scientific research, but the people that do scientific research? Okay, so these people are under pressure. Those that are doing scientific research. Is there more pressure in an epidemic? Yes. What else do you know? Nick.
It's like a totally new situation in an epidemic because usually it's like everyone understood it, they could contain it, but since it's an epidemic, it's already like
There's some new aspect of it. Yeah. Good. So think about that context that we just gave ourselves. Would that have been better for us to have kind of put ourselves in the mind frame of scientific research and science before we went in to read? That would have given us a little bit better understanding of characteristics. Okay? Look at the next question. Identify the task in the third sentence. Paraphrase it in your own words. Hint, determine what characterize means. Remember I told you your task starts with what? Your marker verb. Okay? So somebody look up the word analyze for me, the definition. We think we know, but I need somebody to look up the definition of analyze. Somebody else look up the definition of characterize. Jacob, what'd you look up?
analyzed.
Okay, what is analyze?
Examine methodically and in detail the constitution or structure of something, especially information, typically for purposes of explanation and interpretation.
Okay, very good. Examine methodically. Good. All right, did somebody look up characterize? Okay.
Describe the distinctive nature or features of.
Distinctive nature or features. Okay. The other part that we're probably struggling with are rhetorical strategies. What are rhetorical strategies? Did y'all hear diddles last year? D-I-D-L-S. So diction, imagery, detail, language, syntax, diddles. That would be those would be rhetorical strategies. Right? Figurative language, right? That's not it. You also want to look at organization. How is the argument organized? I think last year y'all talked about modes at the end of the year. Like if you have modes, you'll talk about cause and effect. You have definition. You have a few modes that you can cover. You also have appeals. But I'm going to warn you of this. With appeals, we never, ever use the words ethos, logos, pathos in here. You'll never hear me say that. And if you ever say it, I mark it wrong on your paper. We don't talk about ethos, logos, pathos. We talking about an appeal to patriotism, right? We talk about appeal to common sense, right? Which, aren't they those types of appeals, like ethos, logos, pathos? They are. But we stay away from that terminology, okay? All right. So now that we've seen that, now let's paraphrase. So we would say examine methodically how Barry uses, and I'm just going to say language, because notice all of that are types of language. We also look for patterns, right? Repetition, that kind of stuff. So uses language to Show the distinctive nature of, and I'm going to put SR for scientific research. Now, what does it do for me for you to paraphrase? This year you're going to paraphrase quite a bit. What does it do for me to paraphrase? It shows me that you understand it better, right? The other thing that it does is it makes sure that you don't miss a part of the task. Rhetorical analysis, we haven't really seen two tasks. Argument, you may see it, and with synthesis, you might see it. A couple of years ago in our synthesis question, they said, in our argument question, they said define creativity and talk about how you would teach creativity in school. It was the highest failing essay on the history of the exam because kids only did one task. They talked about how to implement it in school. They did not talk about the definition. So if you miss any part of the task, the highest score you'll get is a 4 out of 9. Just below passing. Okay? All right. Now, let's jump in. So notice this is the first paragraph, right? So, again, what's in the box is what the questions are going to be underneath. Certainty creates strength. Certainty gives one something upon which to lean. Uncertainty creates weakness. Uncertainty makes one tentative if not fearful. And tentative steps, even when in the right direction, may not overcome significant obstacles. So very first, why does Barry begin by defining certainty and uncertainty? What do you mean?
The situation, like the epidemic, and how they can handle it.
Okay, so it describes what? It describes the part of the research?
Yeah.
Okay, so it describes parts of the research. I agree with that. There has to be uncertainty in the research and there has to be certainty. Anybody else?
I think it creates context, like when there's not an epidemic, they have certainty, and there is one, they don't have it.
Okay, it creates context. So maybe with the epidemic, uncertainty comes into play. Okay. Second question, why doesn't he begin with scientific research? Why not begin by defining scientific research? I think we kind of just said it. Right? You can't define scientific research because defining scientific research is too complicated. You have to start with the parts, right? Does that make sense? Also, think like a scientist, not like a kid in English. When you are starting research, scientific research, you must define variables. You must define the parts of your research, correct? So Barry mimics the scientific process in his writing. Does that make sense? He starts off by defining much like a scientist would start off by defining or labeling pieces. Okay? All right. Number 2. What is the effect of the repetition at the beginning of the sentences? So you have certainty, certainty, uncertainty, uncertainty. Now, the answer is not for emphasis. When you say that the author does something for emphasis, you have said absolutely nothing. Think like a scientist. Why does a scientist repeat? First of all, what does a scientist repeat? Trials. Why do they do that? Okay, for consistency or to ensure their research. Why does Barry repeat certainty or uncertainty? Okay, so he does it much like a scientist would to create consistency. Consistency in structure, right? Certainty and uncertainty are antithetical. What is Barry's purpose in contrasting these two concepts? Think characters. Think two characters in a book that are opposing. What is their purpose of each other for each other in the book?
To bring out the character in the other character.
Very good. To bring out the character in the other character. Good job, Logan. So, why does Barry, don't be so surprised, why does Barry use these two, certainty and uncertainty? What does that show? If characters bring out something like that, that relationship is created. One, like something will not come out in the other character unless that character is there. What does certainty and uncertainty do?
Make certain.
Close.
Certainty.
You cannot have, wait, stop. You cannot have one without the other. Your homework this weekend, read, write, annotate, and do the to be a scientist side. That's it. It's right next to the one we just did. Yeah. Do this with a partner, please. Do not do it by yourself. Nerd it up at Panera.